Our speaker today is Benjamin Berry. Benjamin is the VP of Product at Evolution IQ, a provider of AI-powered claims guidance software. Prior to Evolution IQ, Benjamin built enterprise software at startups including Yext, Urbint, and also held various software engineering roles, which is really, really fantastic. Great to see that empathy for the other side of the product trio and the work that we do on that side. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Benjamin. We'll get things started.
And good morning or good afternoon to folks in Germany. So welcome to today's talk. I'm going to explore the topic of scaling product innovation. I'm going to use the metaphor of a phase change, a physics concept about when matter changes forms, for example, from a liquid to a gas. I have to apologize to Scott. I was just doing a little editing last night, and I realized I was calling this a phase shift, totally different physics concept. So a little bit about myself. I'm Benjamin Berry. As Scott mentioned, I've been building enterprise software products for about 20 years. For most of my childhood, I imagined I would be a software engineer, and I was fortunate enough to achieve my dream. I spent the first 8 years of my career coding at 3 different startups. None of them succeeded. And along the way, I realized that my passion wasn't for building software. The first time I could sit in a room for 8 hours a day, I was like, but when do I talk to people? And my real passion was improving, other people's lives with the software that I could build. And since then, I've been in product roles at 3 more startups where I've experienced a bit more success. And currently, I'm the Vice President of Product at Evolution IQ, where, as Scott mentioned, we use artificial intelligence to assist the insurance industry in getting injured people back to their lives faster. So before I dive into the presentation, I'd love to hear a little bit about yourselves. Can folks maybe put in the chat, are you guys people managers, individual contributors? See an individual contributor. Okay. All right. Well, you can catch up. I'll keep moving along. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of introduce this concept of product organization phases. So I'm going to talk about 2 distinct approaches to scaling product innovation that I've seen product organizations use. And you can think of these as these different phases. So the first is what I call the liquid phase. In a liquid product organization, all of the product innovation is deeply connected, and it tends to flow from one source that tightly defines the scope of all solutions. So I like to mentally think of this as, water tends to flow downhill, and I'm sure you've all been in an organization where things tend to flow downhill. So some of the common things that you see in a liquid product organization are, a product leader that's responsible for the complete product vision, a product leader who has the context to weigh in on any product decision. So what I mean by that is they're able to step into a meeting and look at something. They understand what that change, how that would impact the product globally. And they might say, no, I want to take this in another direction, or say this makes sense. You don't have to download them on the context for them to understand any individual decision. And another feature is that the product team tends to be focused on high quality execution of some of the delegated solutions that, again, are flowing from the product leader. So that might be, a single person. In general, every product organization starts with a single person, and it starts in this form where all the decision making is flowing from that person. So it's quite natural that as the team gets a little bit larger, scales to 2-3 people, that it continues that way. The person who's in charge tends to drive most of the solution, and great individual contributors are kind of delivering great features within that context. And that can continue even as you scale the team out arbitrarily. And in this mode, strategy tends to, roll downhill. The other approach, I call this the gaseous phase. And it's useful to think of them as phases because you wouldn't start an organization this way. This would always come after the liquid phase. In a gaseous phase, the product innovation is delegated from a source that focuses more on defining constraints than on defining solutions. So some of the common features you would see here is a product leader more focused on delegating areas of product strategy a product leader who's likely overseen a varied product portfolio. This is, as we'll get into more detail, less necessary if there's only a single product or market. And a product team that's oriented around a more diffuse distribution of innovation. So the way a Gaseous product org is shaped is you have, of course, a product leader who's still leading the organization, but their core responsibility is to segment out the product strategy, setting clear constraints and expectations. Then team members within the organization can drive innovation within those areas individually. At scale, as these sub-organizations start to grow, you may see these sub-organizations go through the same process where they're going to start likely as liquid organizations with a clear central leader, and they may eventually evolve into gaseous organizations in their own right. So I'm going to ask you another question. Would you say that your product organization, at its highest level, if you're in a very large company, is it liquid, meaning focused on executing the vision of a single leader, or is it gaseous with more diffuse innovation responsibilities? A mix of both, I see in the chat. Scott says it's gaseous at product board. Living the dream. All right. So next, I'm going to talk about selecting the best phase. Do we want our product organizations to be liquid like the water in this pot, or gaseous like the steam boiling off? Do you think that one of these is kind of better than the other? Go ahead and type in the chat again. Would you say, a liquid org or a gaseous org is a better product organization? I see depends on the needs of the org. So I can tell this is a sharp audience. I was not able to trick you with my trick question. There's no one right way. And even very, very large companies, I think, can operate, at scale in these two ways. I would say Apple is probably the world's most famous, liquid organization, at least, while Steve Jobs was there. I don't have to go into detail about, how he was able to kind of drive a singular vision, make minute decisions, famously, allegedly in the elevator. And, it's a company that's had, wild success focused on a singular vision. So there's nothing to knock with being in an organization that's operating in this mode. I would say, Amazon, is a little bit legendary for operating with the two pizza model. Let's create teams no larger than, how many people who can eat two pizzas, and define, rigorous boundaries around those teams, how those teams interact. And that creates a world where, innovation can flourish, throughout the organization. And Amazon has had, delivered a ton of products and had a lot of success. And so, you can definitely see that both of these models can work. And it's really all about selecting what's the right model for your organization. So let's dive into how we might assess some of that. I think there's three key criteria to consider when you're thinking about what phase is best for your organization. It's the number of products, the number of markets, and what's your innovation capacity. So to dive into those in a little bit more detail, when you think about the number of products, I would say, while Google has many products, they could clearly be a standalone business oriented only around search, right? And in that sense, Google doesn't need to drive, many different streams of innovation, because they built a fantastically profitable, durable, useful company focused around one product. Whereas if you look at, in contrast, Microsoft, they've got, Xbox on the one hand and Microsoft Word on the other hand. It wouldn't make sense for one product leader to be able to deeply understand, what are the needs of gamers with Microsoft, with Xbox, and, what are the needs of people working in offices using Word, or students, or whomever your users might be. That would be incredibly difficult, I think, to kind of be a strong, liquid product leader in both of those organizations at the same time. And so you can see how, as the number of products that are necessary to kind of sustain your growth increases, you start to need to think about switching into a gaseous configuration. The next criteria, the number of markets. So I would say that Netflix, as a software organization, they fundamentally have one market, right? They build a application where you might use it on your TV, on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer, and it delivers, streaming video content to you. Obviously, Netflix has iterated over time to get here, but fundamentally, they deliver roughly the same software, throughout the world to lots of different people. And in that sense, I could imagine a single product leader kind of really being able to own the whole vision of how is it that software works? How do we, prioritize what we show people? How do they like things? How do we, what's the AI model that determines what we recommend, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, you have Netflix. If you think about Netflix as a content provider, they don't just deliver other people's content now. They obviously make lots of content on their own. I don't think it would be possible for a single executive to say, I deeply understand TV in Korea and content in India and content in Germany and scripted content versus unscripted content. Obviously, those things are going to roll up into a single leader, but you're going to have to diffuse the innovation about how those different folks think about what is good content and select content and allow them to kind of do it on their own. And in that sense, that part of the organization, Netflix, needs to operate as a gaseous organization. I think Netflix is a really cool example of both as well, because there's some synergy from them being able to operate both. This means someone in Korea can be developing shows there, and things like Squid Game can happen where that can, once you kind of see there starts to be some global uptake to that, you can really push that out globally. And it would have been okay, I think, if Squid Game had simply been regional success in Korea, but over thousands of regional successes, they occasionally have global successes like Squid Game, or one of my favorites, a German show called Dark, which I recommend if you've never seen. So the third criteria is, what's your innovation capacity? And so this question requires you to really be honest with yourself about who it is that you have on your team and what they're capable of. Some teams operate with a singular leader whom everyone is following. Even though Morpheus is not the star of the Matrix, if you think of Neo almost as the product that team is trying to produce, right? Someone who can save humanity, Morpheus is clearly the product leader who is setting a clear vision, and the rest of the team is focused on executing that vision for Morpheus. And you probably wouldn't be able to just have that team say, hey, everyone go off in your different directions, and we'll figure out how to kind of save humanity differently and kind of come back. In contrast, you have the Fellowship of the Ring, right? These guys, over several long movies, they went off in their different directions, and they had kind of clear constraints about what their missions were and what they were trying to accomplish it, but broad autonomy and how they went about accomplishing that. And they all had very different arcs, even though they came back to together in the end and kind of achieved one singular goal as an organization. So putting that all together, jumping back into this liquid and gaseous concept, a liquid organization is going to be successful if you've got a limited number of products, preferably one, a limited number of markets, preferably one, and your product team is great at executing, delivering new features, new capabilities, all aligned kind of to march in one direction. On the other hand, a gaseous organization, that makes sense when you either have a large number of products or a large number of markets, potentially both. And critically, your organization has to have capacity to drive innovation in a diffuse way, meaning there are multiple individuals who can drive innovation. So to make that a little bit more concrete, I'm going to walk you through a case study of my experience working at Yext. So if you're not familiar with Yext, it's a technology startup. I guess not a startup anymore, but it was founded in New York City. We IPO'd in 2017. Peak market cap was, nearly $2 billion. So it's one of the most successful exits in Silicon Alley, as some people call, the New York tech scene. So Yext started as Gym Ticket. So Gym Ticket was a business that handled marketing for location-based businesses like gyms and body shops. Basically, they would go onto a site like Yahoo, and they would just make a page like, hey, it's New Year's, are you trying to get in shape? And there would be a phone number there. And if you dialed that phone number, Yext would connect you to a local gym. And then they would charge that local gym basically a referral fee for each inbound lead. Same model with auto body shops, any kind of local business that really depended on a fresh set of inbound leads. In working with their customers, another problem emerged. Getting the basic information about your business to the public had changed radically with the internet. Before the internet, you see the model on the screen here, the yellow pages, they would come and literally walk up to the business and say, hey, do you want to buy some advertising? And while I'm here, let me get your name and your address and your phone number, and I'll get all of that correct in the phone book. And then that would just be, distributed out to the public. So I've got the arrows a little bit wrong here. With Yahoo, what happens is instead, I don't want to pick on Yahoo here. So with the advent of internet sites like Yahoo, they were using, scraping data sources and accepting user-generated content and sort of cutting the business out of the loop in terms of understanding what was the business's name, address, and phone number. And this made a ton of sense, for Yahoo. They didn't have, the feet on the street to be able to go and talk to every business. And additionally, they had all of these customers who could literally tell them, hey, that business is closed, and make sure they were giving their customers, the Yahoo customers, the best experience with the most up-to-date information. They didn't have to wait a year to get a new phone book anymore. The problem for businesses was that kind of cut them out of the loop. They couldn't control how their information appeared on the internet anymore. And in the most kind of malicious cases, the gym across the street from you, they could go online and kind of hijack your listing and route customers, to their phone numbers, which was quite frustrating for local businesses. And so what Yext did, learning about this problem, is they built power listings. Remember, at this time, they were gym tickets. So they built this new software product and established relationships with sites like Yahoo and eventually, Google and dozens of smaller sites that have probably gone by the wayside now. And they were able to put the businesses back in charge of how their information appeared to consumers on the internet. So I joined in 2012 when they spun out the original business, that gym ticket business. They spun that out as Felix. That was a profitable business, generating $30 million a year. But the founder, Howard Lerman, he was your classic kind of visionary founder and CEO, and he said the real opportunity is here. He spun that out. And over the next couple of years, we started to really sell. We were selling already to lots of small businesses. We really grew the market through channel partners in the next year. And then after that, really all of our growth started to come from enterprise companies. At this point, the company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And in 2014, we had fewer than 5 product managers throughout the whole life of the company. And there were something, on the order of, 80 engineers at this point. So we were operating as a really lean product organization. And it was really driven by the successful, bets that Howard had made to that date. Over the next few years, we released kind of like clockwork, one, big new feature a year. We did Zone, which was a beacon project. We did Power Listings Ultimate, which really leaned on reviews for local listings. We did Power Listings for events. And in later years, they did Answers. And while there were some incremental successes in increasing the average spend per customer, and eventually, Yext was doing $350 million a year in business annually. That's where they are today. They also failed at continuing to grow. Right now, today, they trade at like a 1.2x multiple on their preceding 12 months revenue, which is very low compared to peer SaaS companies. And so this kind of shows you kind of both sides of the coin, right? Yext grew successfully for years as a small team because of a visionary leader and a great team that was focused on execution. And this worked while a single core market sustained growth. You might ask, why did it stop working? It's not because you innately have to switch into a gaseous, product or organization. It's because that market, the number of businesses that want to have their information correct online because they want to drive people, to their business, it's finite globally. And Yext did a great job of going all over the globe and getting as much of that market as they could. And it began to cap how much incremental growth that they could drive every year. And so Yext started to invest in these singular one-off bets to expand, the product or market in a really exciting way. But those bets have roughly the success rate of new startups, which is to say relatively, low, and perhaps even lower than regular startups, because you no longer have the nimble, ability to operate as a 10-person team crammed into a room who've got to make it work to, keep the lights on next month. And so when this happens, kind of going back to our criteria, when you need to expand beyond a single, product market, that's when it's a great time to pivot to a gaseous product organization that's optimized for making multiple parallel bets. Of course, that doesn't ensure success, but it puts you on the best footing to try and get there. Now I've talked for quite a while, so I'd love to hear from you all again. Do you think that your product organization is operating in the right mode? Most of you said you're working in kind of a mix of both, or a gaseous organization. Now that we've talked a little bit about what kind of organizations those are well suited for, in the chat, do you think you're kind of operating in the right mode, or it might be for your organization, better to operate in a different mode? Well, wherever you are, you might be wondering, if I'm in a liquid organization, how do I execute a phase change successfully and get to a gaseous organization? So I would say the first and most important thing that you need to do is you've got to continuously validate that you actually need to parallelize growth. Executing well on 2 products or 10 products is just fundamentally more difficult than executing well on 1, which has got you to where you are, where you're thinking about this question to begin with. So the first thing you've got to do is dedicate resources to the core business who are capable of continuing to grow that core business. And if in doing that, they learn that your core business's total addressable market is much larger than you thought. Maybe you unlock a new region or a new kind of user, or you realize that there's some new features that really allow you to grow ARPU a ton. Then it makes sense to take the bulk of your energy and focus it on your core business, because that's where you're already succeeding, and you want to double down on that if you see there's a lot more runway than you anticipated. The next thing you want to do is you want to fund innovation like a VC. You don't want to bet on one thing at a time. You want to put a lot of bets out there, and then you want to escalate your investment as projects meet certain milestones. Just the same way that VCs don't give you $100 million all at once. You start with a seed round. If you reach certain markers of success, then it's time for a Series A and a Series B. You should approach innovation within your org in the exact same way. And that also means you should be aggressive at choking off funding to projects that aren't working out, whether because they're kind of going off the rails into a territory that doesn't make sense for you strategically. They're not getting achieving the business goals that you set for them because it's challenging. That's okay. That's what a great product organization does. It's not about what you deliver. It's about how many things that you consider delivering, because the organization that considers delivering more things is always going to have the kind of cream rise to the top. And then that last thing, that last key you need for a gaseous organization, you remember, was a team that can parallelize innovation. And so you need to either develop or hire talent that can really innovate. And they've got to shift, from an execution focus to an innovation focus. An autonomous innovator is going to be able to deliver desired changes in the marketplace, desired by the business, without the day-to-day management from a product leader. So those innovators, if you think about a couple of dimensions of their focus, their operating guideposts are no longer going to be focused on replicating the decision making that their leader would make, right? If you were working for Steve Jobs, if you didn't want to get yelled at, you wanted to make all of your decisions the same way Steve would have made those decisions. Whereas in an innovation focus, it's going to be more important to understand what are the strategic constraints, set by the leader that the business is operating in, because you want to explore, lots of different avenues to achieve success within those constraints. It doesn't fit the organization well if you just do exactly what the leader would do, because then you're not actually going to get, the most innovation across the organization. And then as you think about communicating and driving kind of alignment, within the organization, in an execution focus, you really the number one thing you want to do is drive alignment, right? From that leader all the way out, throughout the organization. As a successful product person, you're going to interact with a ton of parts of the organization. You want them all kind of pushing in the same direction. When you have an innovation focus, you're deliberately trying to innovate in different directions, and the answers aren't going to be inside the building. They're outside the building. As Steve Blank would say, you've got to focus on getting outside the building, communicating your message to, potential markets, seeing, what you can learn from that, bringing that back inside the building, trying new things, your kind of classic, lean startup MVP oriented loop. So those are the three things you need to focus on while executing a phase shift, from a liquid to a gaseous organization. So as I kind of round out the content today, I just want to recap, and whether you, use this metaphor about gaseous and liquid, the two things I really want you to take away are, to scale growth beyond the constraints of a product market. And this might not be important to you. If you're selling iPhones, if you're selling Google search, your product market is large enough to get to $1 trillion without expanding. But if your product market constrains where your growth can go relative to where your business needs to go, your best bet is to parallelize innovation. And if you're in that situation where you're a product organization and you're trying to switch to a mode where your innovation is parallelized, then you really should adopt a new operating model. You should rethink who are the people that you need and how are you going to enable them in order for your team to be successful. And that rounds out the presentation for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Benjamin. That's really, really great. That was really, really good. I'm going to open it up just for some Q&A. If anybody here attending today has some questions, feel free to utilize the Q&A and we'll gather your thoughts and questions on that side. But I'm going to kick things off maybe with one here. I've worked for a number of different startups prior to joining Product Board years ago. And often for what I think maybe would fit your definition of a liquid leader, one very top down, often a co-founder that sort of owns that vision, has kind of found that product market fit and defined essentially the product over a long period of time. As somebody joins as a new product leader in an organization of that type, what's that point of sort of transition? Like, how do they best manage that transition, and how do they decide essentially, whether that continues the liquid model under their new leadership, or whether they actually sort of begin to branch out into that gaseous approach?
Sure. So let me kind of think about that as two distinct problems. I think the first question is, if you're joining, an organization as a product leader or the first, product person, you want to have real clarity up front about, is, that founder who was driving innovation before you joined, are they going to remain, the product leader and you're executing their vision, or are they expecting you to step in as the product leader and effectively then, you're the leader of that liquid organization. You still have responsibilities to them, but they're different in those two modes, where you are more focused on understanding from them what what their business goals are, and then kind of your responsibility, kind of open-ended, to figure out how to match the technical strategy with that business strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. You touched a little bit on the criteria earlier, number of products, number of markets, and that kind of innovation capacity. I'm assuming that's a little bit of the catalyst in that too, is your observations as a new leader on what you're seeing in the business, what the opportunity is, and your ability to maybe sway or influence essentially the direction of that visionary leader in some point.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last two startups I've joined as the founding member of the product team, and they both happen to be focused on using artificial intelligence to drive decision making. And in that model, you might be in a market with a very large TAM. I operate in insurance today. It's $1 trillion market in the US alone. But fundamentally, your SAM, your serviceable market, only grows as you can, I like to think of it as, put more decisions under management, guide more decisions that the client is making. And because we don't operate in a world with generalized AI, we've got, what you would call weak AI, you've got to build new models every time you want to do that, which means you have to deeply understand that customer problem and make sure not just that the AI is tuned to solve it, but that the rest of your product is tuned to solve it. Fundamentally, you're building new product every time you want to drive, more value. And transparently, I did not do a great job of realizing I needed to execute, as a Gaseous org in my first go around at this. I've hired a bunch of people who would have been very successful at Yext, and in my tenure at Urbint, I tried to put them in a position to succeed, and they weren't really ready they were great at driving execution on features. They weren't ready to innovate and really own segments of the product strategy. So I was constantly kind of running from person to person, putting out fires. And so, as I've done, at Evolution IQ, I've tried to do two things to combat that. One, try to everything you can do to make it be one, more oriented around one product, reuse more things. The longer you're developing one thing, the better. That's all, one product's always better than many products. But then at the points where you have to pivot, and in my case, I have to, in some areas kind of operate as if they're different products, really making sure, a combination of hiring people who specifically have, that proven talent, and then, growing the most capable people that I had on the team, into that capacity, kind of explicitly kind of laying out the expectations and kind of incrementally giving them more of the work that really drives them to be an innovation leader.
Yeah, definitely. In these sort of evolving tech times that we're in, essentially at this point in time, we've got essentially a big shift from like growth to efficiency, I guess you could say. And a lot of organizations are, refocusing their efforts and their directions on that side. Is there an aspect of this liquid and gaseous side that kind of plays into that transition, and things that people can kind of consider as part of that?
Sure. I would say, I was kind of focused on how do you kind of continue to grow growth, but I would say whatever it is, whatever metric you're chasing, if you're just kind of growing it at the same rate over, year over year, kind of the law of exponential numbers makes that look smaller and smaller over time. And so if you're trying to grow an attractive business to the market, which wants to see those numbers, stay as large as they can for as long as possible, you're going to have to, eventually not just grow linearly, but exponentially. Obviously, if you're in a business that chooses, that's not our definition of success, you don't necessarily have to worry about that in that way. But if you're chasing that kind of, whatever your metric is, whether it's efficiency, which, operates under some exponential constraints, or if it's, revenue growth, which again, has the other direction, but, an exponential aspect to it. I think you might eventually find that you have to chunk out, or segment out the product strategy in a way that you need other people to be able to drive it, and not, have a singular, leader. Obviously, I think Google search is like one of the world's greatest products. I think, a single leader could drive growth there. They could drive efficiency gains there. It's kind of genius the way it's organized, but, most of us don't have the luxury of having, built Google search.
Yeah, fair enough. Just one question here from the audience is, what could be the role of individual contributors in a transition? Imagine from one to the other. Yeah.
Sure. That's a great question. So I think as you're thinking about, being an individual contributor, the first things you want to ask yourself, if you're in a company, or especially if you're joining a company, try to understand what phase they're in. And, if you're, you asked about transitioning, but if you're in that liquid phase, you really do want to kind of be able to try to operate in the mindset of, that leader as much as you can. As you're transitioning, the question, I think one of the key questions is, are you someone who's focused on kind of driving, owning one of those sub segments of the product strategy and driving innovation, in which case you want to make sure that you're really reorienting around, driving. I think of innovation, being able to do innovation as not just building great new things, which is a skill unto itself that, you should develop in your career. But when you're in charge of driving innovation, it doesn't matter how many great things you build. The thing that matters is, do you change, the market to the desired outcomes for the business? And if that's what you're responsible for, you've got to really reorient around that and think about how and if you're leading a team, I guess you said you're an individual contributor, but, as you scale, you'll probably end up leading, a larger set of people, how you can reorient, them around. We're not just here to, to build great features, but to create change. And that might mean, even within the work that you're doing, doing 10 different experiments rather than, just kind of focusing on, your favorite idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, I think imagine too, like lots of opportunity here too for individual contributors to move into more owner roles in some ways of an individual portion of a product, its vision, its strategy, its direction, and expand essentially the execution that they do today.
Absolutely. I think if you successfully make that transition, if you're interested, you're ready to go to like a very small startup and found a product team there. The one skill past that is being able to scale and learn to grow other people into that kind of leader. But depending on your startup, you might not need to do that for a very long time, potentially ever. And so you're right. It's absolutely a great growth opportunity in your career.
That's great. Another question here is, how do you bring in user ideas or needs to a visionary who is focused on building for new markets?
Great question. So, honestly, some of it is going to depend on, who that visionary is. I'm sure you and, all of us have worked for folks who, unless they, see it themselves, it's partly what gets them to where they are, right, is their belief in themselves. And so some folks might have to see it themselves. In that kind of case, what you really want to do is try to put them, in an environment where they can hear it directly from a customer. So if you're, I assume here the question is, or you've learned something. Well, instead of just bringing that information back to that kind of leader, you want to think about how can you bring them to the same place where you learned that. And if in contrast, you're working with someone, there are other leaders who are visionary, but they're, very, kind of welcome to input. Then you've got to think about how do they, best accept input. I've worked with folks who, they're happy to debate anything with you, but if you come with numbers, then they're gonna, then they're just gonna let the numbers kind of win the day. So that for that kind of person, you want to make the quantitative case. Some folks, they'll believe what you learned in the field, but they want you to make it personal. So there you're going to want to bring back the qualitative case. Here's, stories from specific prospects, quotes, videos, whatever you can to kind of make that, real to them. So you really have to think about how does that leader, take input? Is it from other people? Do they have to find out from themselves? And then if it is from other people, what's the best way they like to hear it and kind of adapt to that?
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. That's awesome. I think that's the end of kind of the questions that we've got. I think we can probably shift over and wrap things up. I did share our post-event survey, so welcome any feedback that you have on this. We'd love to be able to provide Benjamin with any insights into this session and talk today, so feel free to contribute to that. We also invite you to continue the conversation or discussion inside our community. We'll have a post up here later today with a recap, with the video and everything, but any comments, questions that you have further on this, we'd love to hear them. Lots of ways to continue and grow your product craft within our community, whether that's our Meter Maker program, our roundtables, or our Maker Mentoring program. And we also have lots of other upcoming events as well over the next little while here. We have Perna Kal joining us next week on talking about how to not launch ML products. David Reimer on how to get your product story straight. Nils Davis talking a little bit about roadmaps, so it'll be an interesting conversation. Connie Kwan talking about how to get your story straight and really tell that roadmap story effectively. JJ Rory joining us to talk about the 5 immutable truths of great product managers, and Pavel Samanov also joining us in December to talk about hypothesis-driven product development. We're also always interested in hearing from people like yourselves. If you're interested in speaking or getting involved in a Product Makers event, please do let us know. And with that, thank you very much, Benjamin. It was really great to have you involved. I really, really appreciate you sharing your knowledge here today with our community, and we will talk soon. Thanks again.